Hi there, welcome to this quick screencast lesson on finding sources for your research project in AP English. I'm going to try to keep this as concise as possible, but I also want to make sure that you get everything that you would have gotten if you had been in class today. So, first of all, keep in mind that the goal of this paper is to highlight a few parts of the issue that you learned. That's what the assignment sheet calls for. We're primarily talking about section 2, and our goal there is to highlight, these are just a couple of things I learned, these are a couple of things I thought interesting. So what we want to do is find a couple of supplementary sources so that we can look at the conversation around these things we learned beyond what we learned in the book. The book was our jumping off point, but that's not all there is. We want to make sure that we're not just finding more information by the same author or just the same ideas repeated. This is sort of taking what the author said in this book and adding on, seeing what other conversation is happening about it. So just kind of a reminder of what our point here is, what we're trying to do, why we're looking for more research. The first thing we want to do is start with our topic lists. So hopefully you have yours with you, and you want to start off by identifying 3 or 4 factors that the book talked about that you found interesting. Start by kind of figuring out what you want to explore further, being careful not to look at the author's overall argument. We want to look at sort of little things that were associated that he brought up. So I'll use my example that I've talked with you guys about. So my book was called Adoption Nation by a man named Adam Pertman. And his overall argument was that the state of adoption in the United States has changed over the last 50 or so years. People used to be very hush-hush about it. There was a stigma, there was shame about it on both sides. Unwed mothers were shamed for giving up their children for adoption, but they were also shamed for keeping their children. Adoptive parents didn't want their kids to know that they were adopted because it was all very quiet. In the past 50 years or so, it's shifted to a place of much more openness, both in how society views it and accepts it as sort of a normal way to build a family, and also open relationships between adoptive families, birth families. And Pertman, this is sort of his overarching argument, and he thinks this is a good thing. But now that's really broad. That's not what I'm going to write about. In my section 2, I have to identify what parts of the issue are of particular interest to me. So here's what I've come up with. These are the factors that I'd like to explore further. First of all, he talked a little bit about complications that come up when you are approaching adoption post-infertility, after you've had all this trauma and loss and frustration, and then you move on to this other process, and what that is like and what extra complications that brings to the table. The second issue is he talks about the challenges of transracial adoption, which was something that I kind of knew existed. Obviously, you understand that when you adopt a baby that is of a different race or ethnicity than you are, you get that there's going to be some challenges inherent to that. But I'd like to learn a little bit more about it because I think that is really an important topic to consider that I just don't know much. The third issue that I would look for is he talked a little bit about focusing on the needs of the child in the triad. That's what they call the grouping of the birth parent, the adoptive parents, and the child. And it talked about how, the adults are the ones going into this agreement. The adults are the ones making these decisions, but it's really not about them. And so sort of making sure that the process stays focused on what's in the best interest of the child in the situation. I thought that was something sort of an interesting philosophical aspect of it. So those are my 3 factors that I would consider. Now, just take a couple of minutes and pause and sort of look at your topic list. What factors are you interested in exploring a little bit more about? So now that we know what factors we're looking for, when we start looking for sources, I can search for those subtopics, those factors, rather than doing a more general search for adoption. Because if I just search for adoption, it's going to be, I'm going to get hundreds of thousands of resources that aren't going to be very helpful. So ultimately, the point of narrowing this down to a couple of factors of interest is that I'll get more useful search results. ultimately, we're looking to identify 3 or 4 sources. We have to limit ourselves here because otherwise we're going to have way too much source material and not enough room for commentary. Because remember, we're also working with a book. So when we're searching, I mean, it's obvious that, of course, initially we're going to probably create a list of a multitude of sources that we might look at. But ultimately, we want to narrow it down to just like maybe one source per factor that we can use in conjunction with the book to talk about what we learned on the issue. We want to make sure, and this is just a reminder, that what we find are adding something new to the conversation rather than just repeating the same thing the author has already said. We want to maybe look at somebody who disagrees with the author, maybe disagrees with us, to sort of expand on, here's what people are saying about this topic. Might be somebody who talks about the same issue that the same factor that the author did, but takes a different stakeholder's perspective, something that the author of the book left out on the factor. Just making sure that we are going beyond what the book already told us. The types of sources you find, the places you go to look for them, they're going to be different for everyone depending on their topic. I can't put any overarching restrictions on this to say, oh, they've got to come from this place or that place, or they've got to be this type. Some sources are, of course, going to be better than others and fit better, but I can't put any official hardcore limits on it because everybody's topic is going to necessitate different types of sources. And I urge you to get creative in the types of sources that you're using. I mean, don't discount things like TED Talks or podcasts or, an interview done on 2020 or, something from the morning call about a local story related to this issue. There's so many different ways you can go, and I would hate to see you limit yourself. But that being said, we also have to figure out, okay, so where do we even start? Where can we look for this? Because we all know that, of course, Google is our friend, and I don't deny that. But we have to make sure that we're searching and really evaluating what we're finding to see what it's going to give us. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of an example of how I might approach my subject and my search. So I'm going to go over here, and the place I'm going to start is a good place for, I think, everybody to start, and that's Nazareth High School library page. And we've got a whole bunch of resources right here, and the first step would be to find ones that would be good for your topic. So maybe if you're doing that book on the parental advisory book on music censorship, maybe this is a good go-to database for you, but that's not going to be helpful for me. For me, I think my best resources are probably going to come from over here. I think the science database, not so much. Gale Virtual Reference Library might be a good one because that's kind of a general database. The Health and Wellness Resource Center, since I'm dealing with like a sort of a family kind of thing, that might have some options for me. Lit Resource Center, definitely not useful because I'm not writing about literature. Science, no, probably not. And student resources in context, that's probably, I'm thinking, less complex because it's labeled as student resources. So I'm just going to try this one, Health and Wellness Resource Center. And I can't log in because I'm not at school. So I do not have the password on me right now, so never mind. If you are at school, you can access any of this. If you're not at school, you won't be able to. There is a password that we can log in. To be honest, I don't know if Strauss has those posted for you. Maybe on the library Facebook page, you could check that. Or you could certainly get in touch with her and she can help you. You can access it from home. You just need extra information to do it. And I don't have that on hand right now. So I apologize that I can't show you that. A couple of things to think about if you are doing it. Make sure that when you search, you're using advanced search and you're using sort of very specific search terms, because you don't want to use just the big broad term because you want to make sure you're getting things appropriate to what you're looking for. Don't limit yourself to just the first couple of results on the page. I mean, there's a lot that you could find if you just take a couple extra minutes to scroll down a little bit. The other thing you want to make sure is that when you're using the advanced search, you limit it to full text articles, because on databases, a lot of times they don't have the full text. You can't access it. So you'll just get the abstract, which is like a little blurb. So if you limit it to full text availability, then you'll be able to get the article that you find that sounds like it'll be really useful for you. The other thing I sort of showed in class was a Google search. So, for example, I searched, my second issue was transracial adoption. And so when I pulled this up, the one thing I noticed was that all of these Google results that were coming up were very specific: AmericanAdoptions.com and AdoptUSKids.org, AmericanAdoptions.com. These are all sort of general informational pages, which is probably, look, this one's even a blog, and not to say that that doesn't have good information on it, but it might not be what I'm looking for. So, one thing to consider is what kinds of sources are you getting? Because just kind of a general website like this that has, a couple little blurbs about transracial adoption is not probably going to be the kind of information that I'm looking for, or that would be helpful. I need something a little bit more specific to go beyond what the book said. So, like, this could be interesting. It looks like it's an episode from NPR. That could be useful for me. I passed up here, there was a TED Talk. I would have to look a little bit deeper to find out, who this person is and what their credibility is. But always sort of questioning sort of these general informational websites are probably not going to be very useful. Just because they're meant to be general overviews rather than in-depth looks at it. I happen to know there's an organization that I heard about on a podcast that actually specializes in supporting this particular type of relationship and this type of adoptive family. I can't remember what they're called right now. So I think what I would like to do, and I'm not going to take up your time to do it, but I'd like to go back and listen to that podcast, find out the name of that organization, and then go to their website to find out a little bit more about the work they do. And I suspect they've got much more in-depth resources on the subject. Okay, so that's the basic sort of overview in terms of finding your sources. And this screencast was just meant to kind of give you the basic overview of what you need to consider when you're looking for sources and where to begin looking for it. Obviously, EagleBlock, during class, whatever, we can talk a little bit more one-on-one about your individual scenario, and I can help you find what you need.